There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and to another Friday Reads. I think I'm going to get this posted Friday night, but I'm not filming it until just before 2 p.m. Been a sleepy, lazy morning and finishing up a book that took me forever to finish. Yeah, I don't know. It may be midnight. I hope to get it up by midnight. Should I rephrase that? I hope to get it posted by midnight. I don't have any personal news. You don't want to hear what my week's been like. It hasn't been great. But I did get a present in the mail about 20 minutes ago, and I'm going to do a present opening. It came from Japan. I know what it is, but you don't. I am so excited. This is a repeat gift from one of my bosses. She's more than a boss. She's also a student of mine. She's also the manager of that particular group of classes. Known her for years. She came all the way to Saskatoon 5 years ago for my wedding, and I'm still teaching her and for her on Zoom in Japan. So here it is. It is something like 18 packages of one of my favorite pasta sauces from Japan. Boy, she's got it so sealed up. Can you read that? It's mentaiko. This is mentaiko pasta sauce. And if you don't know what that is, I'm guessing about 80 to 95% of you won't know what it is. Mentaiko it's a seafood, it's a fish-based seafood sauce, although it does not, to my taste buds, taste the slightest bit fishy. It is made from the eggs of pollock or cod. And I guess they call eggs of those particular fishes roe, R-O-E, so it's usually made of cod roe, sometimes of pollock roe. And they're mushed up and made into a sauce. This is the spicy version, and it's called mentaiko. It's salted cod. I guess mentaiko was always cod. I'm just reading off some website. I never really knew what it was until 2 minutes ago. Just knew that I liked it. The plainer sauce is tarako, and that's what I started with, and it's not salted fish, and it's not spicy. And this one is quite spicy, so it's lovely. All I taste is the spice. And it's great on spaghetti. These are about $2 in Japan, and I have not been able to find them in Canada or anywhere that would ship to Canada. So my boss, Rika, she sent me a package about 6 months ago, and I sure enjoyed those, and now she has refreshed the supply. I can't wait to have some more mentaiko pasta. All right, here is the week in review. I thought a really interesting essay about crying while reading. So, Anna, I promise not to try and make you cry today, but what did you think of this article?
Go ahead and try. That would be a fun video, Sean.
There you go.
I do have some thoughts. So I come to this, I didn't read Clarissa. I'm probably chiming in around the late 1900s. In fact, I can tell you where I appear in the article or where I join the cultural history. It's Bridge to Terabithia.
Oh, which I'd never heard of until I saw this article. So.
Oh, Sean.
It is an era of playwrights and the popularity of theaters where all the performers are children exists, just like it did in Elizabethan England. The two main characters are both young people who are on the margins in certain ways. One is Shay, who's a young girl. She's part of what's called an Aviscultan faith. Her people are largely descended from something like the Romani, and they worship birds. All birds are manifestations of God, and they read the future by looking at the flight paths of birds. And her mother is a spiritual leader in this community. She believes that birds are gods, but she's not sure she wants to follow in her mother's footsteps.
And I guess in terms of personal, it's not really personal stuff, but just a reminder that to those who are already patrons on my Patreon, thank you for your support, and don't forget about the bookish brunch tomorrow. It's a little later in the day to accommodate the New Zealand Australian contingent of patrons, so I hope we get to see quite a few of them. And I'm going to alternate the time zones, because any time zone that works for people in Australia or New Zealand doesn't work at all really for Europeans or British patrons. So we're going to alternate month to month, and I'm excited about that. Also, tomorrow is my 6-year anniversary on BookTube. Yay! And I'm going to have some of the usual stuff. I can't afford to do all the usual stuff that I've done in years past, but I'm going to do most of it. Those videos, I hope, will go up tomorrow. If not, the latest they will go up is Sunday, but I'm going to have, well, you'll just have to stay tuned. Watch on my channel this weekend for more information. I've had a great reading week. It's been a kind of, a mix of experiences, but certainly got quite a bit of reading done. I have finished 3 books. I'm going to tell you about a few more that I've gotten a ways into and tell you what I've started. In terms of the books I finished, this is probably going to be in my top 5 reads of 2023. The New Zealand novel Loop Tracks by Sue Orr. This was a pseudo-buddy read, a face-to-face pseudo-buddy read with my dear friend Gwen here in town, and we had a great discussion about it last Sunday, maybe. So that's when I finished it. As I'm sure I explained before, it opens in 1978 when abortion had recently been declared illegal, or at least it was unavailable for a time. I don't think it was for a long time, but I don't know my New Zealand social political history very well, but it was illegal in 1978. And this poor kid, she was 15, the protagonist, Charlie, gets pregnant. And so her parents are mortified and want to get her on a plane, which was what all the women needing abortion in 1978 in New Zealand were doing, was getting on a plane to Sydney, getting their abortion and coming back the same day or the next day. And so that's how this story opens. However, and this is all I'm going to say about that first part, there is a flight delay. Plot ensues, and then we pick up with the same character, Charlie, decades later, 2020, I believe, and she had grown up in Auckland, and now she's living in Wellington, and she has raised her grandson, and it's for the reader to discover how all that works within the family, and that's a pretty interesting story that gets revealed in perfectly timed and plotted little bits so you get the backstory of all that. And her grandson is 20, I think, and he is just starting university, and he is somewhere on the autism spectrum, presumably, and she's very protective of him. He gets a girlfriend, Charlie, our protagonist, who's a young grandmother. She might be 60, I'm not sure. I can't do the math. If she was 15 in 1978, how old would she be in 2020? You tell me. But anyway, she works as an educator. She is a fascinating, multi-layered protagonist. I just loved her. Probably one of the more fascinating relationships in the entire novel is the relationship that she forms with her grandson's new girlfriend. It had conflict, they were at cross purposes, they really liked each other and very soon loved each other, and there was just lots of complications in their relationship that was just so well told. We eventually meet her son, and I'm just going to not say a word about him, but then the story gets dark, and you begin to appreciate the title. Loop Tracks, if you know anything about music, which I don't. It's a way of repeating a certain musical phrase as a backdrop for the rest of the song. I think that's a correct description of what it is. And you can see how the novel is structured as a series of loop tracks of the various themes of secrets and lies and deceptions and self-deceptions and misogyny and women taking rather than being granted freedom. It's a powerfully feminist novel. There's a lot of politics. We soon get into the COVID era in New Zealand. There's a lot about that and the election campaign that re-elected Jacinda Ardern in the middle of it. Just the other day, I talked about this book on an episode of Books on the Go, Anna Bailey Karras' fabulous podcast. And as I said to her, and I've made this comment in many other contexts on many other videos, that most novels that have a lot of politics in them, the politics sits too heavily on the story, and this was not like that at all. It was just perfect. I think that's all I'm going to say about it. It was a joy. You can get your hands on it outside New Zealand without paying an exorbitant shipping cost to get it from the publisher, which is what I did. Since then, it has become available on Amazon as a Kindle book, but also as an audiobook, and I previewed the audio when I was almost finished and wished that I had done it as an audio text combo because it was this lush, wonderful New Zealand accent. It's also a story that is connected very deeply to its New Zealand setting, and my friend Gwen has spent a lot of time in New Zealand, and she loved that part of it as well. You need to read this book. It's one of the best books I've read this year. I absolutely loved it. I finished my reread of Barbara Pym's debut novel, Tame, Gazelle. I read it to Robin from California. This was part of her Bibliophile Besties benefit. I read the entire book to her over Voxer, and we had such a good time with it. It was her first Barbara Pym novel, and I think I've converted her, and it was a joy to read aloud. I giggled probably too much, but this was the first Barbara Pym novel I read, and then I just started reading them in sequence. So it had been 6 or 7 years since I'd read it. Once again, what hooked me was, yes, there was a lot of humor, and I absolutely loved the humor, and it kept cracking me up as I was trying to read it to Robin. And there is an undertone of radical empathy with which Barbara Pym reveals the character of Belinda and the other spinsters in the novel, and I just found that it was also a cry of the heart underneath and through the humor. So to me it was a really layered read, and I may be a little bit unique in the way that I describe my reaction to Barbara Pym. The story is light, but what is shown through all the foibles and humiliations and yearnings is also something quite deep that makes me just fall in love with her characters and identify with them. Barbara Pym, Tame, Gazelle. And about 3 minutes ago, I finished this, and I'm not sure it was quite worth all the time spent, but I gave it 4 stars because it was so well done. This historical novel, Cecily, by Annie Garthwaite. Cecily Neville was the 15th century wife of Richard, Duke of York, who all of the War of the Roses, he was instrumental in the British court at the tail end of the 100 Years' War, and then really triggered the War of the Roses that followed. And this novel chronicles all that. It's a very fine novel. It held my interest. I never once considered bailing, but by the end I'm not sure that I got enough out of it. So here's the deal. I couldn't not compare it to Hilary Mantel, and it just doesn't come up to that level. And I get in trouble when I make this distinction. So I'm going to try to make it to kind of slather what I'm about to say in a whole bunch of nuances and maybe not get into so much trouble. The last time I made this comment, I remember, got blasted. So the on-nuance comment is, there's historical fiction that is genre fiction, and then there is literary novels set back in history, which are literary novels. And I do make that distinction, and Hilary Mantel is a literary novelist. This was not a literary enough novel. In spite of quite lovely writing, I didn't think the characterization went deep enough for me to get deeply, deeply invested in what happened. Nonetheless, it's really well done, and I had to Google my way through the first third of it, and then I kind of got it, because did I ever learn about the War of the Roses? I don't know if I did. If I did, I don't remember a darn thing about it, and so I had to Google everything for the first third or something, and then I was okay, and then I could I still Googled a little bit, but then I could follow the story. Who's on whose side, and blah, blah, blah. So Cecily was ahead of her time, in a certain sense, in being a politician, and if the psychological dynamics in this novel are true, and who knows how you would ever find out if they were, she also really kind of pushed her husband, Richard, Duke of York. He was very reluctant to push his claim to the throne and stand up to his enemies, and she was always pushing him. I don't know if that's true, but certainly it is true that she, particularly after he was murdered in a battle, she was instrumental in getting her son onto the throne, who was Edward the something or other, 4th or 5th, maybe. And then the baby brother, Richard, was Richard III, the famous one, whose grave was recently discovered. It was really interesting. I recommend it, especially if you like historical fiction better than I do. I like literary fiction, and to me, again, I'm going to repeat it, I don't know if I included enough nuances, Hilary Mantel's Cromwell trilogy is not historical fiction in that genre sense. It is literary fiction, and the characters are just so embodied and so deeply realized, and I didn't think that was here, but I wonder if the novel would have been... I give it 4 stars, and most people gave it 4 or 5 stars. It's very popular. She did a play-by-play from when Cecily and her husband, Richard, the Duke of York, watched Joan of Arc being burned at the stake in France in whatever year that was, through to her son getting on the throne. And it's a really thick novel, and I wonder if she would have been able to develop the characters more if she had focused on a shorter chunk of the time. I don't know. I'm glad I read it. I can't recommend it all that highly because it's only a 4-star read, and you know how I feel about 4-star reads. They're not really worth my time. So I'd like to talk to you briefly about 3 books that I've started that I'm far enough into to give you a first impression. The first one, and I talked about this on the Book Cougars Friday Reads video, which is already up. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. This is a lesbian novel for Shorty September, Dot and Ralfie by Amy Hoffman. It was published last year, and I'm enjoying it. I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to end up loving it, but I'm certainly enjoying it. They are a lesbian couple in their late 60s. Both of them still working. So are they in their... Yeah, they're both in their late 60s. And suddenly, at this stage of life, physically, things are starting to go. So the butch one, Ralphie, she's injured her knee, and she's home for weeks and weeks while her knee heals. And she's not very happy about that. And Dorothy, Dot, doesn't have any major complaints, but she's starting to feel a little creaky, and they're starting to think how much longer they can stay in their condo that has steps with no elevator, and this and that. Meanwhile, we're getting the backstory of the relationships that they've had for years and years and years, and it was pretty spicy. Can you say polyamory? I'm not even sure if polyamory is the right word. Polyamory is when you're open and honest about things. I'm not sure the adulterous relationship that I just found out about a chapter or 2 ago was all that open and honest. But anyway, it's not boring. And this is the final novella that I'm reading to prepare for my chat that I'm going to be taping next week with the Calgary novelist Barb Howard about novellas. This was one of her favorites. Tim Krabbé's The Rider, translated from the Dutch by Sam Garrett. And surprisingly, I'm really enjoying this. I didn't know anything about bicycle racing. I've never watched those of you that really know me won't be surprised by this, but it is quite a statement to make. I have never watched a sports game of any type on TV from start to finish, and I've certainly never watched like the Tour de France or anything. I didn't know anything about it. Wasn't interested in it. I'm not interested in it. And Tim Krabbé is narrating a fictional account of it's not the Tour de France, but it's a fairly major, I think it's a 2-day race. And all the characters of all the cyclists and all the things, and I'm Googling everything and learning about airflow when you're riding behind other bicyclists, and the name for when you're riding in a group. There's a name for that. I can't remember any of it, but it's all in here. I'm finding it quite fascinating. Stay tuned. I have to finish it by next Tuesday to talk about it with Barb, but it's certainly starting out really good. And I am about 40 pages into this book that's on the Booker long list, Pearl by Sean Hughes. This is for a pseudo buddy read with Alex. Starting out really good. I'm hooked. It's, I think, quite well written. I haven't quite decided about the writing, but the story is fascinating. It's about a woman looking back on her childhood when her mother disappeared. Possibly died by suicide, but I don't know that for sure. There's a lot of speculation in the earlier section of the story that's told in flashbacks. And the protagonist now is starting her own family, and she's a lot of emotions about her disappeared mother. So it's in a way evocative of my Book of the Year, Collected Works by Lydia Sandgren, but it's a very different style and a very different story. I'm quite taken with it, so of course that means it's not going to be on the shortlist. Alright, I'm going to be starting 4 novels. 2 of them for sure are short. The other, I think 3 of them are short. I can't remember how long the one that's on ebook is. We'll start with the one that's not necessarily short. Let's see, how long is it? Oh, it's just over 200 pages, so I think they will all basically qualify for Shorty September. But a couple of them weren't on my TBR. This one wasn't. This is the second novel by Carolina de Robertis, The President and the Frog. I'm not sure if it's her second. It's the second one that I've read, and it's the most recent one that I know of. I read her Cantorus a couple of years ago and loved it. This one doesn't, I don't think, have any overt lesbian themes, but maybe I will be surprised. This is quite a political story, as you might be able to tell from the title. And this is for a pseudo buddy read with Elba of Seriella. So stay tuned for that video, probably in early October. We're going to record it at the end of this month, so I better get started on it. And you know how I do with keeping up with all my pseudo buddy read commitments. But time to get started. Looking forward to it. I was a huge fan of Cantoris, and I'm not expecting something similar because this is quite a political story. It's hard to write a novel about Uruguay that isn't political, and there was lots of politics in Cantoris, but I'm not expecting so much sensual lesbian sex in this one. But I'll live. This was on my shorty September TBR, and then Heidi and I decided to buddy read it. So this is the next buddy read for Heidi of My Reading Life and I. Voting Day by Clare O'D. A short novella that is set in Switzerland in, what was it, year 1956? 1959. There was a referendum on women's suffrage. Can you imagine a country in Europe having a referendum that late in the 20th century, and that it failed? The results were continued to deny Swiss women the right to vote, and this is a novella about the lives of, I think, 4 different Swiss women on that day. And I'm very excited about this one too. This was a book put onto my radar by Lindy of Lindy's Magpie Reads, and it's by an Edmonton writer, Wendy McGrath's Santa Rosa. I think it's a trilogy, but it might even have more books than 3. I can't remember that, but this is the first one, and it was published back in 2011. And it is about a marriage breaking up, and it's told through the eyes of kids, and it's quite poetic. I read the opening on my... somewhere I read it, to some of yous, and trust me, it's really quite poetic and quite wonderful. So looking forward to getting into that, and then hopefully continuing with the series. And the final one is for Bookspin. As I've mentioned a couple times, and you all know, I'm sure, Rick McDonnell has come back to BookTube, and he's going to be reviving BookTube Spin. But in the meantime, I've been, and I'll probably continue with both, I've been participating in something almost identical or very similar that's happening on Litsy called Bookspin, and every month there's 2 numbers drawn, and so I get 2 books that I wouldn't otherwise be get to anytime soon. I'm getting to them that way, and I love that. One of the ones I'm going to be starting this month, I'm going to start this week, and I have it on ebook. I put a list of basically 20 ebooks that I forget are there on my Kindle or on my iBooks or whatever, Apple Books, so that I will get to them when their number gets picked. And the first one this month is a Canadian novel, A Bit Much, by Sarah Jackson. It's fairly new, I think maybe last year. There's a pretty good rating on Goodreads. I hate when they compare books to other writers because it's usually wrong. Everything that publishers put about the book on the back cover is wrong. I think I established that last week. But it says it's for fans of Sally Rooney. And it's about women and friendship. What else do I need to know about it, hey? That's a pretty fabulous cover. I'll tell you about it when I get a ways into it. So that is my somewhat abbreviated Friday Reads because, you know, the shorter it is, the earlier I'll get it up. The earlier I'll get it posted tonight. So I'm going to just say goodbye now. Thanks for watching.